Welcome back to Beyond the Feature. I'm Dr. Patrick Jones, and today we're having a conversation that I think is long overdue on this show. It's a conversation about the technology landscape as it actually exists across the organizations that we serve. Not just the tools and features, but the bigger picture of what's happening, what's getting in the way, and where the real opportunities are. Now, as always, beyondthefeature.com has everything related to this show, and go to drpjj21.com if you want to find out more about me and the kind of stuff I'm doing. So here's a phrase I've heard on LinkedIn lately, and it's what inspired today's episode. Organizations across SLED, commercial and manufacturing sectors, are navigating today's evolving technology landscape. That sentence is true. It's also one of those sentences that's easy to nod at without really thinking about what it means. So that's why I wanted to come up with this episode today and take a look at it together. So SLED, if you haven't already heard that term before, it's state, local, and education, SLED. It's the shorthand for that technology industry that uses to describe government agencies at the state and local level and the education institutions of all kinds. So then we have the educational organizations that are associated with that. Then there's the commercial organizations, businesses across every industry. And then there's manufacturing, the companies that actually make things work. And all of those together covers an enormous range of the organizations that Beyond the Feature was actually built for. So here's what all of those organizations have in common right now. Despite being completely different in what they do, who they serve, and how they're funded, and what their daily work looks like, right? Every single one of them is dealing with the same underlying tension. Technology is moving faster than most organizations can absorb. The tools are powerful, the possibilities are real, but the people, the processes, the culture, the budget, and the governance aren't always ready to meet the technology where it is. And that gap between what the technology can do and what an organization is actually positioned to do with it, that's exactly what this show exists to talk about. That's why we're here. And today we're going to take a look at it through the lens of 3 different sectors, because understanding how this challenge shows up differently in each one helps all of us think more clearly about what it means for our own organizations. Now, before we go sector by sector, I want to make one point that runs through everything else we're going to talk about today. And it's a point that might be the most important thing I say in this entire episode. So here you go. And for our loyal followers of this podcast, we've actually said it quite a lot. But here it goes for everybody else that's joining us. Every technology challenge is really a people and process challenge wearing a technology costume. I've worked across education, government, business, and consulting for a long time. And the organizations that struggle most with technology adoption, regardless of which sector they're in, they're not struggling because they picked the wrong tool or because the technology doesn't work. They're struggling because the people side of the change didn't get the same attention as the technology side. Most of the time, the tool gets purchased, the licenses get assigned, the system gets configured, and then nothing really changes. Hey, we're done, right? It's because nobody thought carefully about how the people who are supposed to use it actually work, what they need to understand before they'll trust it, and what support they'll need to build those new habits. Sound familiar? Well, we talked about the behavioral science behind this in a recent episode, and it applies here too. What's different about today's conversation is the scale and the urgency. The technology landscape isn't just evolving, it's accelerating. AI alone is reshaping what tools can do faster than any previous technology wave. And every sector we're going to talk about today is dealing with that acceleration while also managing their own unique set of constraints, whether it's budget limitations, regulatory requirements, legacy systems, workforce challenges, stakeholder expectations that don't always line up with the technology. Those are all things. So that context is important because when you understand why different sectors face different challenges, you stop applying the same generic technology advice to every situation, and you start to ask the right questions for the specific environment you're working in. That's what we're going to do today. All right, so let's start with SLED, state, local, and education. I want to spend a little extra time here because I think this sector is probably the least understood by people who haven't worked in it or with it. And it's also one of those that has some of the most interesting and complex technology challenges. So state and local government agencies, your county clerk's office, your city public works department, your state's Department of Health, police, fire, these organizations provide services that citizens depend on every day, and they're doing it under conditions that most commercial organizations would find impossible to operate in. Fixed budgets that are approved by a legislative body and can't be adjusted based on what the market demands. Procurement processes that require competitive bidding and can take months or years. Regulatory requirements that are layered and sometimes contradictory. Changing leadership with every election cycle, which means technology initiatives which were a priority under one administration can lose momentum when a new leadership comes in. And a workforce that's often highly experienced and committed, but that has operated in the same systems and workflows for a pretty long time. Now, the National Association of State Chief Information Officers released their top 10 technology priorities for state CIOs in 2025. And the number one priority was AI and robotic process automation. Number one. That tells you the SLED sector isn't ignoring technology. The appetite for modernization is real. But a 2024 AI readiness report from Presidio found that only 19% of SLED leaders who hadn't yet adopted generative AI felt prepared to implement it. Compare that to 8% for the private sector. That means that even the private sector is struggling with readiness, but SLED sectors, those challenges run deeper. Now, why? Well, there's a few specific reasons. Legacy systems are a massive factor. Many government agencies are running on software and infrastructure that's decades old. They've tried to modernize, but replacing core government systems is complex. It's expensive and it's risky. When your legacy system runs payroll for an entire county, you don't replace it casually. And new tools often have to integrate with those old systems before they can work, which adds significant complexity and cost to the modernization project. Cybersecurity is another enormous factor in the SLED sector specifically. Government agencies and educational institutions are pretty much the most frequently targeted organizations for cyber attacks because they hold enormous amounts of sensitive citizen and student data, and attackers know that. The threat landscape for SLED organizations is particularly intense. In 2025, cybersecurity strategy is increasingly being framed as whole of state issue, where state agencies, local governments, and educational institutions are thinking collectively about their defensive posture rather than each trying to solve it independently. That collaborative approach is smart, but it requires coordination and trust between the organizations that doesn't always have natural working relationships. And then there's the education piece of SLED, which has its own distinct texture. I was in that field for 14 years. Schools, colleges, and universities are managing the technology needs of both the people who work there, the administrators, faculty, and staff, and the people they serve, the students. Those two groups have different needs, different levels of tech familiarity, different privacy protections, different expectations. A school district has to think about FERPA compliance for student data. At the same time, it's trying to figure out how to implement AI tools for teachers and whether those tools might expose student information. The compliance dimension is always running in the background. Now, here's the framing that I think is most useful for SLED organizations navigating all of this. The question isn't, how do we adopt the latest technology? The question is, how do we modernize in a way that serves our constituents better, stays within what our governance and budget allow, and doesn't create more risk than it eliminates? That's a harder question, but it's the right one. And the organizations that are making real progress in the SLED space right now are the ones asking that question and building their technology strategy around the answer. Now, let's talk about commercial organizations, businesses across every industry that are operating in a competitive market, trying to grow or at least hold their position, and dealing with technology change that's moving faster than most management teams can comfortably keep up with. The commercial sector has some real advantages over SLED when it comes to technology adoption. More flexible budgets, faster procurement, and the ability to make decisions closer to the ground without waiting for legislative approval and a market incentive that makes staying current feel urgent rather than optional. When your competitor adopts AI and becomes 30% more productive, that's not an abstract concern. That's a threat to your revenue, and the commercial sector is moving. McKinsey's 2025 research found that 78% of commercial organizations are now using AI in at least one business function. That number's been climbing steadily, and it's not slowing down. The competitive pressure to adopt is real, and it's landing on organizations of every size, not just the enterprise companies with dedicated AI strategy teams. But here's the challenge that I see consistently when I work with commercial organizations, particularly the small and mid-sized businesses. There's a significant gap between deploying technology and actually getting value from it. You can subscribe to Copilot, you can move to the cloud, you can buy the licenses and turn on the features. But if your data is messy, your workflows haven't changed, your team hasn't been trained in a way that actually builds new habits, and there's no governance in place to make sure that people are using the tools correctly and consistently, then the investment doesn't produce the return you expected. We've talked about this in several of our episodes this season. The clean data episode, the Copilot readiness episode, the SharePoint governance episode, the behavioral science of change episode. These aren't separate conversations. They're all parts of the same conversation about how commercial organizations can move from having technology to actually using it and using it well. There's also a specific challenge that small and mid-sized commercial organizations face that large enterprises don't struggle with in the same way, and that's capacity. A large enterprise has a dedicated IT team, a change management function, a training department, and a budget for implementation support. A small business often has one person wearing three hats, a tight budget, and a team that needs to keep doing their actual job while also figuring out new tools. The technology doesn't care about the constraint, though. It expects the same level of setup and governance, whether you're a 10-person company or a 10,000-person company. And that capacity gap is where consultants, managed service providers, trusted technology partners, we add real value for those commercial organizations, not by selling them more tools, but by helping them figure out which tools are actually right for where they are, how to set them up in a way that'll last, and how to get their people to actually use them in a way that changes how work gets done. That's the conversation I have with the organizations every week. And the ones that are getting the most out of their technology investment are almost always the ones that are invested in the people and the process side alongside the technology itself. Now, manufacturing is a fascinating sector to look at in the context of today's technology landscape because it sits at the intersection of two worlds that are increasingly hard to separate. The physical world of machines, production lines, supply chain, and a skilled trade workers, and the digital world of data, AI, cloud, and connected systems. For a long time, those two worlds operated pretty independently. A plant floor ran on its own systems, the back office ran on different systems, and the two didn't talk to each other, at least very well. You had highly experienced operators who could feel when a machine was about to have a problem before any sensor told them. And you had a data team analyzing reports that were already days old by the time they got them. That disconnect is exactly what the manufacturing sector is working to close right now. More than 77% of manufacturers have implemented AI to some extent as of 2025. That's up from 70% just 2 years earlier. That's meaningful adoption momentum. And Deloitte's 2026 manufacturing industry outlook, that found that 1 in 5 manufacturers plan to deploy physical AI, robots that can navigate real production environments and handle physical tasks within just 2 years. That's not science fiction anymore. That's a planning horizon. But here's what the same research is also finding. The number one challenge for manufacturing organizations isn't the technology, it's the workforce. Deloitte's 2025 Smart Manufacturing Survey of 600 manufacturing executives found that the top obstacles to smart manufacturing implementation are managing complex organizational transformations, mitigating operational risk, and addressing talent shortages. 3 people and process challenges, not one technology problem. So think about what this looks like in practice. A manufacturer invests in AI-powered predictive maintenance, sensors on the machines, algorithms that detect patterns, alerts that tell the maintenance team when something is about to fail before it actually does. The technology is proven. The return on investment is documented. And then you have to get the maintenance technician who's been fixing those machines for 20 years to trust a software alert over their own experience. That's not a technology problem. That's a change management problem. It's the same behavioral science we talked about earlier in the season, showing up on the plant floor. The supply chain dimension of manufacturing makes this even more complex. A manufacturer doesn't have to manage its own technology landscape. It has to coordinate with suppliers, distributors, logistics partners, and customers who are all at different stages of digital maturity. A factory might have a sophisticated data platform internally, but if their key supplier is still faxing purchase orders, the digital advantage runs into an analog wall. That integration challenge, connecting the digital sophistication of your own organization to the varying readiness of your entire supply chain ecosystem, that's one of the defining technology challenges in manufacturing right now. The cloud story in manufacturing is also worth noting because it's a bit different from other sectors. Manufacturers are embracing cloud-based tools for back office functions, collaboration, HR, finance, and communication platforms like Microsoft 365. But the operational technology on the plant floor itself, that's more likely to stay in a hybrid model. The data from those machines is sensitive, and it's often air-gapped from outside the world. The latency requirements are real, and for many manufacturers, the idea of having your production system dependent on an internet connection, that feels uncomfortable in a way that having your email in the cloud doesn't. It's a legitimate concern, not technophobia. And a cloud strategy for a manufacturing organization has to account for that. All right, now let's look at what these 3 very different sectors have to teach us about navigating the technology landscape, because I think the patterns are more consistent than the differences suggest. The first pattern is that every sector is dealing with the same fundamental tension between speed and readiness. Technology is moving faster than any organization in any sector can comfortably absorb. SLED organizations feel this because their governance structures weren't built for speed. Commercial organizations feel it because the competitive pressure to move fast sometimes gets ahead of the foundation required to move well. And manufacturing organizations feel this because the physical world doesn't move at the pace of software releases. And in every case, the organizations that are navigating it best are the ones that have been honest about where their readiness actually is, not where they wish it was. The second pattern is that legacy, in all its forms, is the silent constraint in every sector. In SLED, it's legacy technology systems that can't be replaced overnight. In commercial organizations, it's legacy processes and habits that persist long after new tools have been purchased. And in manufacturing, it's legacy workforce skills and legacy operational models that were built for a different era. Legacy isn't a failure. It's an accumulated weight of how an organization became what it is. But you can't ignore it when planning technology change. You have to design for it. Now, the third pattern is that the workforce question is the hardest question in every sector. Not which tool should we buy? That's the easy question. The hard question is, how do we help people develop the skills, confidence, and habits to work differently? In SLED, that question runs up against workforce longevity and institutional inertia. In commercial organizations, it runs up against capacity and bandwidth. And in manufacturing, it runs up against the identity and expertise of highly skilled workers who've built careers doing things a specific way. The answer in all three cases involves the same elements: genuine investment in people development, leadership modeling, patient reinforcement, and a realistic timeline for that behavioral change. And the fourth pattern, and this is the one that I keep coming back to, is that the organizations making real progress across all three sectors are the ones that went beyond the feature. They didn't just turn on the tools. They thought about the workflow. They thought about the culture. They thought about what the technology was supposed to enable, and then they built the conditions for it to do that. That's a more deliberate approach. It's a slower start, and it produces fundamentally better results. All right. Now, the first thing you can do to, let's talk about this a little bit differently now. The first thing you can do is where your organization actually is in your technology landscape. Find that out. Not where you want to be, not where your marketing materials say you are, but where you actually are. Do your people have the skills to use the tools you've already bought? Are your processes designed to get value from your technology investment? Is your data in a state where AI tools can do something useful with it? Those honest answers are your starting point. The second thing is to stop treating technology projects as a separate from people projects. Every technology implementation is a change management project in disguise. If you plan for rolling out a new tool that doesn't include a plan for helping people actually change how they work, you've only got half a plan. The other half is what makes it work. And the third thing, and this one is specific to leaders in every sector, it's to invest in staying informed. The technology landscape is moving fast. You don't have to be a technical expert, but you do have to understand enough to ask the right questions, make informed decisions, and recognize when the advice you're getting is serving your organization rather than the person selling you something. That's part of what this show is for. And it's part of why building a relationship with a trusted technology advisor, someone who understands your sector and isn't trying to just hit a sales quota, that's valuable. And the fourth thing is to remember that every other organization in your sector is navigating the same landscape. You're not behind because you haven't figured it out yet. You're in the same position as most organizations doing what you do. The ones that get ahead are the ones, they don't have the biggest budgets or the most advanced tools. They're the ones that are most intentional about how they use what they have. Now, whether you're running a county government agency, a small manufacturing company, a nonprofit, a school district, or a commercial business of any size, the technology landscape you're navigating right now is real, it's complex, and it isn't going to slow down. The question isn't whether your organization needs to engage with it. It does. The question is whether you're going to engage with it intentionally, with a clear sense of where you are, where you're going, and what it's going to take to actually get there, thinking with the end in mind. The frame that I always come back to, the one that this entire podcast is built around, is that it's never really about the feature. It's about the workflow it enables, the people who have to change their habits to use it, the culture that has to support that change, and the strategy that has to connect the tool to the outcome you're actually trying to achieve. That's true in a government office. It's true on the manufacturing floor. It's true in a classroom or a boardroom or a nonprofit's operation team. Here's one thing you can do this week. Think about one place in your organization where there's a gap between the technology you have and the results you are expecting from it. Just one. And ask the question, is this a technology problem or is it a people and process problem wearing a technology costume? That question, if you answer it honestly, is where the real work begins. Now, if you want to go deeper on any of the topics we talked on today, from the data governance to cloud strategy to change management, workforce development, that's stuff I help with all the time. So everything is at beyondthefeature.com. Go ahead and share this episode with a colleague who's in a different sector from you. I think the pattern recognition that comes from comparing how different organizations face the same challenge is valuable. And this episode is built for that. So make sure you share it, subscribe to it, give it that little like, thumbs up over there. If you're on the YouTube online, I think there's a hype button you can hit, and that helps other people find it also. And maybe we can keep growing the word and help people out. All right, I'm Dr. Patrick Jones. Thanks for being here on Beyond the Feature, and we'll see you next time.